Welcome to the newest episode of Beatin' and Bangin'. I'm your host, Kyle Dalton. In today's episode, we've got multiple stories and angles to talk about on the Austin Hill suspension, including NASCAR's official response to the penalty and why they ruled the way they did. Mark Martin offering his take on the matter and sending a strong message to Hill and anyone else who might consider hooking another driver in the future. And some really interesting comments from Colleague Racing President Chris Rice about Richard Childress. Speaking of Martin, last week he was unwittingly thrust into the headlines following the conversation of Larry McReynolds and Danielle Trotta on the playoffs versus the full season point system. Well, this week Martin talked about his position on the Door Bumper Clear podcast and then sent a specific message to NASCAR and what will shut him up about the subject if they do this one simple act. Denny Hamlin, like Martin, was also unexpectedly included in last week's debate on playoffs versus the full season points. On Monday, during his Actions Detrimental podcast, he responded. And we'll wrap up today's episode with our By the Numbers segment, including the much-requested Mario Kart standings from last week's video. However, before we start crunching those numbers, let's go back to Monday and Denny Hamlin's podcast. So if you recall, last week's big topic of conversation, which I talked about on the channel, was the discussion started on SiriusXM NASCAR Radio when a caller called in and said he preferred the old point system for determining the championship. And then this happened.
Whoever's driven the best throughout the year.
Our system now rewards winning and consistency.
Consistency. Rewards both. And while we want to go back to a system
Chris,
where somebody rolls into the last race of the year and either A, they've already sewed up the championship, or they just have to finish 18th or better, you can wish for that. I think that ship has sailed and she's not coming back.
To Rick and Michigan's point, they have these committees now where drivers sit in, and I'm not going to mention the driver that's on the playoff committee that I have heard is screaming loudly to go back to that system, and I pray to God everyone in NASCAR inside that room.
I bet it's a driver that's not won a championship. Would I be right on that? Bingo.
Correct.
You got a winner, Johnny.
Let's keep moving forward, not backward.
So after that conversation, a fan posted on X informing Mark Martin that they were throwing shade at him. Danielle Trotta then responded to that post and confirmed she was talking about Martin, saying, quote, "Mark, you know I love you, but what we got is a whole lot better than what we used to do. We need a playoff, we need eliminations, we need to reward winning and consistency. This format does it all and is highly entertaining," to which Martin simply replied, "No, we don't." Well, later on that same day, Larry McReynolds responded to another fan who expressed disappointment in his remarks about Martin. Quote, "Absolutely not true. Mark Martin is my hero and proud to call him a friend. If you would listen closely, it's a driver that is active and on the council. I find it so hard to believe how you folks come up with stuff sometimes," end quote. On Monday, Hamlin did in fact confirm that he is on the playoff committee, and then he said this.
I think, my opinion, Danielle was definitely talking about Mark. She even referenced Mark in a tweet afterwards. And then Larry was probably referencing me. I don't think they were on the same page. I'm serious. And then I guess Larry said, if you would listen closely, it's a driver that's active and on the council. He never said that. We listened closely, and Larry never said that. He was backtracking.
Yeah, I mean, this is just our gossip section of the week. But you've never advocated for this Winston Cup system in the first place.
I have not. That is correct. So let me just tell you my problem with mainly the characters on not just this show, but there's others, but it's mainly this one, is that I've never seen another sport that continues to question what their star athletes say than this one here. Like, if a NFL player says, the NFL really needs to look in these low blow hits, I can't contemplate in my head another NFL show that says, who's that guy to say that? He doesn't have the credentials to be saying that. He doesn't know what he's talking about. And that's what the people on that channel typically do time in, time out, is that they'll take what someone says. If they might even use this week, Denny Hamlin said it was hard to pass. He must not have been in that car when he was driving from the back to the front. He didn't know what he's talking about. That's what they'll say. They continually question the people that actually have the credentials to give an opinion. That's my problem with that channel. And it's not just this show, it's primarily this show, but there is others that can, continually bash down the people that give them the content and the sound bites for them to. It's supposed to stir a discussion, not an attack on them personally. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, like if Larry doesn't like the idea, you can take that idea apart in all the ways, but
yeah, tell me why that idea is wrong.
But you had a personal attack, and it was, well, he doesn't have a championship, so he's not allowed to have the opinion. Is what it came.
Am
across.
I missing something? Does Larry have one?
No.
Okay. So should we not listen?
That's what I. Yeah.
It doesn't make sense. It's just a way for them to stick their nose in the air and act smarter than they actually are.
So there's several things that I want to touch on. First, I've listened to Denny Hamlin enough in the media center for the last several years, including talking to him about the playoff committee in March at COTA. And I listened to his podcast. As he confirmed on Monday, he's never been one to advocate going back to the full season point system. So Danielle and Larry got that wrong for starters. And second, as Hamlin pointed out, clearly the two weren't on the same page. She was talking about Martin and McReynolds was talking about him, although, as mentioned, not once did McReynolds say active driver in his original remarks. And lastly, and most importantly, as I saw on social media and Hamlin pointed out, Larry doesn't have a championship either. So the fact that America's crew chief is dismissing a driver's opinion because they don't have a championship is hypocrisy to the highest degree. Okay, so that's Hamlin's response to last week's conversation. Also on Monday, Mark Martin talked about his position on the Door Bumper Clear podcast and said this. Take a listen.
Obviously, I'm leading the charge for what I believe. I know the majority of the fans want a 36 race season championship. That's a fact. And then that's over 50%. And then the next 30% want a 10 race chase. So it's an 80-20 issue, whether it's a playoffs or not playoffs for the fans. However, I'm also smart enough to know that, the TV broadcasters and NASCAR and the owners are all addicted to the revenue that they bring. Whereas in my day, the revenue came directly from the fans, as from ticket sales and whatnot. And it's a different day and age, but I will shut up leading that charge when they tell us the truth. And I know what the truth is, but when they would just come out and say, hey, look, we know the majority of the fans would rather see a full 36 race, championship, but here's why we're not going to do it. Just do that, and
Make you feel
that's
a little bit
enough
better.
for me.
First thing, I really think it's important for fans to hear him point out how NASCAR's business model has dramatically changed. When he was racing, fans in the stands were the priority and paying the bills. Now it's TV and the networks have a much bigger say in what happens. And second, I thought it was really interesting how he just wants NASCAR to admit he's right and most people want that 36 race championship. Will that happen? I'm curious to hear what you guys think about it. And now let's move on to the other big story from the weekend in Indianapolis that has multiple tentacles to it. And that's the Austin Hill hook of Aric Almirola in Saturday's Xfinity Series race. And NASCAR announcing late yesterday that Hill will be sitting out the weekend's race at Iowa, serving a one-race suspension. This morning, NASCAR Senior Vice President of Competition Elton Sawyer made an appearance on SiriusXM NASCAR Radio and responded to the Hill penalty.
He was held 5 laps at the race or during the race at the track over the weekend, but there was a response yesterday. What did NASCAR consult? What resources were utilized to lead you to the response of the one-race suspension yesterday?
Yeah, I think, Mike, when you look back at that, obviously we take these very serious and feel like as stewards of the sport, we have to it's our job to kind of keep law and order. So on Saturday, when you witnessed that incident, immediately it kind of jumped out at us that there was some retaliation. So that's why we reacted at the track the way we did and holding Austin for 5 laps there. Then once we got back the R&D center, started gathering more information, talked to Austin, talked to Aric, got their input, continued to look at all available resources through camera angles and data that we could pull, and looked at it and felt like that fell into a bucket very similar to what we had dealt with a year or so ago at Las Vegas with Bubba and Kyle Larson, as well as what we dealt with at Charlotte with Chase Elliott and Denny Hamlin. So, as our team went through this, and we don't take these lightly. It took us a while to figure out exactly what the right thing was to do, and that's our goal in each and every one of these situations. What's the right thing to do for the sport, for the garage area, and for the integrity of our sport? And felt like in this case it was a one-race suspension.
So you cited two examples, but one that we saw earlier this year was when Austin Cindric got into it with Ty Dillon, and there was not a suspension. Was the high-speed element of this kind of what you went into in terms of determining what to do with Austin Hill, Elton?
Yeah, that's a great question, Pete. I think when you looked at this particular situation with Austin Hill, it fell more in the category of what we dealt with again at Vegas and Charlotte with those two cases there. Road course, with the 2 and the 10, just felt like that one rose to a level of a penalty, but not a suspension. And again, there's a lot of information that we gather. There's a lot of conversations around that, but ultimately we landed where we did on all of those situations.
So not really a surprise there, as NASCAR viewed what Hill did as similar to what Bubba Wallace did at Las Vegas with Kyle Larson back in 2022, and what Chase Elliott did a year later to Denny Hamlin at Charlotte, and not similar to what happened to Ty Dillon at COTA earlier this year. Well, as I mentioned in Monday's video, Richard Childress wasn't happy on the team radio during the race, and actually referenced the COTA incident when Austin Cindric hooked Ty Dillon and received a $50,000 fine and was docked 50 points. This morning, Colleague Racing President Chris Rice made his weekly appearance on SiriusXM NASCAR Radio and talked about the Austin Hill penalty.
And so at the end of the day, as a race team, we have to do our job to explain to our drivers, like, this is not going to happen, because you're hurting the race team. You can laugh about it and say you're going to sit at home and drink beers and do whatever you want to do, but it's hurting the race team. And that's what's more devastating to me, that people don't understand that. Like, whether the drivers understand that or not, I think people, they just don't understand that. They can do whatever they want to do and be okay with it, because they'll come back the next week, but the race team's the one suffering, and I feel sorry for Richard. I mean, I know he got a lot of views on his video, and I think you guys don't even talk about that. It hurts the race team when a guy makes a decision that he shouldn't make. I was not riding in the race car. I don't know what his mindset was. We obviously know what drivers think nowadays. But when people hook you, like we got hooked at COTA, I think that it needs some aggressiveness towards the driver and not hurt the race team as much, because Richard Childress didn't do anything. Like he was not sitting in the car. He didn't push the steering wheel. He didn't mash the gas. And I probably stirred up a can of worms here, gave you something more to talk about, but he didn't.
He's right. Richard Childress wasn't sitting in the car. He didn't push the steering wheel, and he didn't mash the gas. But he did do one thing. He hired him. He hired Hill, and let's be clear, this isn't the first time people have called out Hill's aggressive driving. Martinsville earlier this year is just another reminder. And if you want a little more evidence that this type of behavior isn't anything new for Mr. Childress and his organization, here's the whole irony in all of this. Who is replacing Hill in Saturday's Xfinity Series race at Iowa? Not Kyle Busch, but Childress's grandson, Austin Dillon. Who, do you remember what he did a year ago at Richmond? Yeah, he wrecked 2 cars in that final lap, including hooking Denny Hamlin. Oh, what a wild world we live in. And now it's time for our By the Numbers segment. And the first thing we're going to talk about today is our last 5 races analysis. Chase Elliott holds down the top spot for yet another week with an average finishing position of 7.8. increasing from last week's impressive number of 6.2. But as you number 9 fans know, he still finished inside the top 20 every single race, including his 13th at the Brickyard. We do have some movement in second and third positions, with Alex Bowman and Ty Gibbs swapping spots from last week. The number 48 pilot has been really solid in his last 5, with 4 finishes inside the top 10. Gibbs dropped a spot after his 21st place result on Sunday, but still has a solid AFP of 9.8, with 3 finishes inside the top 10, including a pair of top 5s. Tyler Reddick slots in the 4th spot with an AFP of 10.8 despite his 29th place result at Indy, and Ryan Preece comes in at 5th with an AFP of 11.4 with a pair of top 10s in his last 5. Rounding out the top 10 are Denny Hamlin, who has 3 top 5s in his last 5. Brad Keselowski and Chris Buescher are just a couple of positions behind their RFK teammate in 7th and 8th, and the top 10 is rounded out by a couple of Kyles. Larson comes in at 14.2, which includes his big improvement over the last 2 races with a couple of top 5s, and Busch, who has 2 top 10s in his last 5. And now let's go down to the bottom of this list, and we have some big names, including William Byron coming in 33rd with an AFP of 26.6 over his last 5, which is an actual improvement over last week. He is followed by Ross Chastain, who made an early exit on Sunday and has had an ugly 4 out of his last 5 races, and look who's at the very bottom. Noah Gragson is below Cody Ware with an AFP of 31.2 and doesn't have a finish above 25th in his last 5 races. Ouch. Moving on to our race progression graphs from Indianapolis, starting with our top 5 finishers. As you can see, Bubba Wallace started 2nd on the front row and had a strong day running inside the top 5 for most of it. The 2 RFK cars of Brad Keselowski and Ryan Preece had strong days as well, with Preece making a big move. Speaking of big moves, take a look at Denny Hamlin, and he started at the back of the field and moved all the way up to 3rd. I think we'll be seeing more of him in our biggest mover segment. Kyle Larson finished runner-up, so let's take a look at the rest of the HMS cars. And you can see it wasn't a spectacular day, but a solid one for the 4-car organization, with all 4 drivers finishing inside the top 16. As noted, Hamlin had a good day for JGR and Christopher Bell. Despite that late incident with Zane Smith finished inside the top 10. Meanwhile, pole sitter Chase Briscoe struggled while Ty Gibbs never really ran up front for most of the day. Let's take a look at Front Row Motorsports, and Todd Gilliland recorded his 2nd consecutive 6th place finish at the Brickyard, while his teammates, Noah Gragson and Zane Smith, who was involved in that late incident with Seabell, finished in the 30s. And lastly, I have to talk about the day of Team Penske and Wood Brothers, because as you can see, it clearly shows how 3 of the cars were on a similar strategy to start the race. Interestingly, Blaney, who started much further back on the day, ran a different strategy and was the only one to finish inside the top 10. Moving on to our biggest movers for the day, starting with those going in the wrong direction, and you can see Erik Jones was the biggest loser on the day, dropping 33 spots after losing that wheel early in the race. Tyler Reddick dropped the 2nd most spots from 4th to 29th, and Austin Dillon, who was involved in that stacked-up restart to start Stage 2, never recovered and dropped 18 spots on the day. Joey Logano and Chase Briscoe both lost 17 positions apiece. Conversely, those heading in the right direction include, as I mentioned earlier, Denny Hamlin as the biggest positive net gain on the day, improving an impressive 36 spots. Other big gainers on the day were John Hunter Nemechek, who picked up 24 spots, and look who gained the 3rd most. That's Catherine Legg, picking up 21 positions, moving from 38th to 17th. Other notable big movers were Ryan Preece, Ryan Blaney, Justin Haley, and Chase Elliott, those last 3 all picking up 17 spots in the race. And our final item of the day is the Mario Kart point standings. Last week was the first time I showed them, and there were a lot of you who enjoyed it, so it's back this week and for the rest of the season. As Chase Elliott mentioned last weekend at Indianapolis in his media availability, the points race has been tight the last couple of seasons, and this year is no different. And it looks like the regular season points championship with 4 races to go is coming down to a 4-horse race between Kyle Larson, Denny Hamlin, Christopher Bell, and the aforementioned Elliott, with a total of 8 points separating the top 4 drivers. It'll be really interesting to see how this plays out over the course of the next 4 weeks. All right, guys, that's a wrap on today's episode. Let's talk about it. Starting with the remarks of Denny Hamlin in response to what Danielle Trotta and Larry Mack said last week. What did you think about what Hamlin had to say? And what did you think of Mark Martin's remarks? First, on the playoffs and how he'll shut up whenever NASCAR admits that they're wrong on what the fans want. And secondly, what he had to say about a driver thinking about the consequences of right-hooking someone and how it could tragically end in death. Pretty sobering remarks from the Hall of Famer. And let me know what you thought of NASCAR's penalty to Hill with the 1-race suspension. And of course, I want to hear what you guys think of Chris Rice's remarks, feeling sorry for Richard Childress. And lastly, let me know what you thought about this week's By the Number segment. Any numbers in there that surprised you? Thanks as always for checking out the latest episode and supporting the channel. I really appreciate it, and hope you have a great rest of your day.